Welcome to the Southern Ohio Synod podcast. I am Gary Pakuch, and I serve as the Synod Youth Ministry Church Coach and Community Sandbox Manager for the Southern Ohio Synod, which means I help churches take the next step in children's, youth, and/or family ministry, whatever that means to them. I also manage the Synod's resource website called The Sandbox, where we gather together resources that have been created by members within our Synod and put them in one central location so folks can have access to it. I am so glad you've joined us today for our episode.
So hi, I'm Pastor Tim Mentzer. I'm the Assistant to the Bishop for Discipleship, Leadership, and Engagement for the Southern Ohio Synod. And welcome to the Southern Ohio Synod podcast. I have with me today Reverend Dr. Dorrell Briscoe, who is the Dean of Religious and Spiritual Life at Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. Dorrell, take a second just to introduce yourself to us.
Hey everyone, happy to be here. I'm Harold Dorrell Briscoe, go by my middle name Dorrell, and I have the privilege of serving as the Dean of Religious and Spiritual Life at Rollins College, and I'm also a professor in history. And so, it's kind of our fame to claim is that's the school where Mr. Rogers went, and so we are all about kindness. We're all about being good neighbors. That's where he went to school, and he loved it and had an incredible presence here for 50 odd years. And so, right outside of Orlando. And I am best friends to Tracy Briscoe, my amazing, incredible wife, and my 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls, Luke, Noah, Amelia, and Ella. And please pray for me, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade. So we have a very busy house. But some really fun things happening. I'm a plant dad. I have 151 indoor houseplants, and kind of all around the house. And so I just spend my time. It's funny. I joke with my friends. I'm like, I've skipped past the midlife crisis and gone straight to granny hobbies, like just straight with no midlife crisis. Straight to granny. Like I'm just, I'm knitting stuff. I'm pruning plants. It is awesome. So, I'm just so happy to be here with you guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time. Appreciate that.
Yes.
What I'd like to do in our time together is to talk about sort of the strategy and leadership approach you outlined in your book called There's a Storm A-Comin'. The subtitle is How the American Church Can Lead Through Times of Racial Crisis. Because I think it can give us both a model and some guidance in how we as leaders and congregations can address the situations in which we find ourselves. I think you first got onto this idea because you studied public administration, emphasizing urban revitalization and disaster resilience as a graduate student at Texas A&M, right?
Yes.
And you did, your thesis was entitled Adaptation to Climate Change in that area, Perceptions and Prospects. So what did you hope to accomplish by working on that project?
That was a couple years after Hurricane Katrina. That event was a seminal event in my life that where I changed my major. I vowed to, I changed my graduate trajectory, graduate school trajectory, and vowed to one day live in Louisiana to help out in recovery. And I did just that. I just could not believe we were so unprepared as a country. I didn't understand how the greatest country in the world, the most powerful, the wealthiest country in the world, could be so unprepared for that type of crisis. And so this is like 2 years after that, and Houston and Galveston during that time got hit with a major storm. Now I can't remember, it might have been Rita or Wilma that hit it, but just an extensive flooding, extensive loss of life. And so my thesis project, capstone project, was like how can we change to a shifting climate that is producing stronger, more intense, and more frequent Category 3, Category 4 hurricanes and storms, right? The sea levels are rising, the ocean's getting warmer, and it's creating these more and more powerful storms. We have to adjust. We have to adapt. And so what can coastal communities do? What infrastructure resiliency pieces do they need to put in place to ensure that their citizens will be safe in the future? Yeah.
A lot of times, Dorrell, I draw a distinction between reaction and responding.
Yeah.
And reaction is all those knee-jerk things, but it sounds like you're pushing for a model that's more about being prepared and knowing how to respond when the time comes.
That's right. That's right. There's a quote that says everyone has a plan until they get hit in the mouth. And I understand that. I get that. But I'm also like, I still think you need a plan. Like, I still think it's important to be prepared. I think I do think it is important to collaborate with a group of key stakeholders to lay out a roadmap towards resilience. The United States Coast Guard was the government department agency that really shined during the tragedy of Hurricane Katrina. They rescued tens of thousands of lives. They made certain key strategic decisions before the storm hit. For example, moving their operational base further inland to ensure that communication equipment and personnel were out of the storm's way and therefore could operate with efficiency and effectiveness. And because of them, so again, so thousands of lives were saved. And so, yeah, having a plan in place, I think, is very critical.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And so your work on that project really led you to develop almost a model of how groups respond in times of crisis, and I think the concepts that you develop from your project, you say, can be applied to moments of racialized crisis. What led you to make that connection?
Yeah, sitting and Tim, we were colleagues, and we are very close friends. But we were in the cohort at Duke Divinity for their doctor of ministry program, and they're like, hey, you need to write a substantial thesis, and I'm like, oh man, what do I want to write about? And I was interested in writing on leadership and racial justice, right? Because for me, this was 2015, and we had we had a crisis, a racialized crisis, in the form of Charleston, Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. June 2015, a man named Dylan Roof walked into a church Bible study, sat for an hour, listened, prayed, read scripture, and then afterwards, in cold blood, murdered 9 people, shot many more. Nation was rocked. And so this is when I started my program at Duke. I was just shocked at the barbarity, the brutality of it. But I also was shocked at the fact that many faith leaders didn't quite know how to respond and lead during that crisis. So I was like, okay, that's why I bridged it. And I'm like, wait a minute, what if I created a model, some type of plan to help faith leaders, religious leaders respond to these crises due to the fact that we have a changing climate, changing socio-political climate that is producing these crises, right? The climate that includes the fact that we have digital interconnection in the form of smartphones that can instantly capture egregious abusive acts at the hands of law enforcement. That we're seeing a rise in far right hate groups, right? We're seeing this in our political climate, and I'm like, okay, we really need to prepare for a changing climate here, because things are just going to get worse.
So why is it you think that this church is strategically equipped to use this model?
I think we're equipped. Great question, Tim. I think that we're equipped because I think that a sizable contingent of our population desire to be comforted in their soul when these acts occur. It produces a considerable amount of soul wounding. As an African American, I can speak to the collectivity of our trauma that has a historical that has historical underpinnings. It stretches back to the time of the antebellum South and slavery, all the way through a period of Reconstruction, lynching, Jim Crow, mass incarceration, 1970. There's a historical through line, right?
Mm-hmm.
It creates a collectivity to pain, where an event can happen in Hoboken, New Jersey. I can feel it in my chest in Spokane, Washington, right? Coast to coast, because of the historical trauma that's occurred. I believe, as ministers of the gospel, as advocates of peace, we are positioned to provide a balm for the ripping and tearing and rupturing of the soul when these occur. Because when these events occur, what's the question we ask? What do we say? That could have been me. That could have been my son. That could have been my, right? There's a personalization to it. So I really do think that we are called to not only look out for the personal flourishing, but the systemic flourishing of all people. And so I think that's why we're well positioned.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you think there are any growing edges the church has to be able to address these moments?
Yeah, certainly. I think there certainly is a fixation and a preoccupation with hyper individuality, and you can hear it. I mean, we hear how we talk about biblical stories, how we talk about the gospel, how we talk about community discipleship. It can be a bit narrow, that focuses primarily on my lived experience, my journey. Whereas we have to remember Jeremiah 29:11. I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in the future. Well, the Spirit of God moved through the prophet Jeremiah when he uttered those words, and that those words weren't meant or said to a specific individual, but to an entire community that was dealing with the emotional rupturing of being exiled and uprooted from their homeland, forced to adhere to certain new cultural customs. These were people that were in trauma, that were in pain, communal pain. So we have to understand that God speaks to communal, systemic issues, and it's very important that we articulate that in our discipleship, in our programming, in our budgets, in our apparatus as as a faith community. And so I think that's really critical. I think it's a growing edge that we can get a little bit better at, as far as not being so narrow-minded when it comes to kind of a hyper individual focus.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it was shortly after the George Floyd death in Minneapolis that you were interviewed by CNN about your book.
Sure.
I'm just curious how that happened.
Oh my gosh, the craziest thing. I'm in an RV. A 30-foot 4-motorhome RV, traveling in the Midwest. I wrote the book, I published it, and I'm like, yippee, I'm done. Let's go on a family vacation. And we drove from North Carolina to Urbana-Champaign, Illinois, to surprise my mom for her 60th. And then we drove up north to Lake Michigan to see some dear friends in Michigan. Honestly, Tim, I was just randomly cold calling different news organizations. Hey, I wrote this book. I think it's important. It speaks to a very, to this crisis that we're living in right now. I had an acquaintance that worked for a news organization called First Coast News Now in Jacksonville, Florida. When I was a senior in college, I was the student body vice president at the University of North Florida in Jacksonville. Mid-sized college, cute little college, great school. And I did an event called Garbage on the Green. It was a waste audit. And to figure out how we can have better recycling practices on campus. Well, I called this new news organization, and this young reporter named Victor Blackwell showed up to campus and interviewed me in this event that we did in Garbage on the Green. The Green is like our central gathering
Sure.
spot on campus. And years later, I found out that this little the unknown reporter from Jacksonville became a head news anchorman for CNN, Victor Blackwell. I DM'd him and I said, Victor, I don't know if you remember me. We actually grabbed lunch together a couple of times in Jacksonville. This was 2007. Fast forward to 2020. He still remembered me.
Oh my
And he's
gosh.
like, he responded. I couldn't believe it. And he said, hey, send me over a PDF copy of it. I'm like, oh my gosh, what? So I sent it over and he's like, I love it. My producer's going to get in touch with you. I could not believe it. And so the producer got in touch with me and said, we want to have you on the show. Now, let's be fair. This was not, Anderson Cooper prime time or out front with Aaron Burnett prime time. This was Sunday morning at 7 a.m. This, on CNN. But it was just Victor is just an incredible human being, and he took, he was very passionate about the project and had me on and interviewed me for about 6-7 minutes to talk about it. And so, yeah, really cool experience. Yeah.
Awesome. And my understanding is that it led the book then to be a sort of a bestseller for that.
Yeah, it just kind of, yeah. I think it just kind of went a little like semi-viral ish kind of. It just, you get on there and folks are interested in everything. And I don't know if it was so much like, the book is very practical. I don't want to minimize my work. I believe in the work. I think it primarily received the traction that it received, primarily because of the historical moment we were living in.
Sure.
Right. Right. How do we respond to racialized storms, racialized crises? What can we do? Because pastors and faith leaders from all different religious traditions, we're being confronted. What do we have to say about this?
Yeah, I can remember shortly after that happened, the mayor of the city where I was serving just sent me a text and said, I need you downtown now. And she was calling clergy. And the first thing she asked was for us to pray over her before she then started speaking to the protesters. It was a powerful moment.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that one of the gifts of your book is that you take concepts and present them in a way that is practical and easy to grasp. And you had talked about 4 parts of the framework that you have.
Yes, that's right.
Can we just run through them quickly?
Sure. Yeah, very quickly.
So the first one is realization.
Mm-hmm. Yes, realization. What do we need to be aware of? What do we need to be educated in? Why is there so much pain? Why are folks crying? Why are they marching? It is a concerted effort to be cognizant of the pain and soul wounding that has occurred in our fellow humans. That requires us to do some digging, research, read books, and learn about the history of these issues, and to better prepare ourselves to shoulder their pain. Realization, right? How do we become aware? How do we become educated in what is going on? A lot of folks, ignorance grows when we refuse to be open-minded to the lived experience of others. And so when we choose to open and say, I'm going to open it, I'm coming in, I'm reading and I'm learning, not to refute, not to debate, but out of a genuine desire to learn about where you're coming from. I think it creates the foundation for this work. So that's realization. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. And then the next is readiness.
Right. Yeah. And so as we realize these things, what are some things that we can do as a congregation, as a ministerial team, as a staff to get ready for the next storm? I always say, What will you do? What will you say? And how will your team react if a Charlottesville occurred in your town? If 1,000 neo-Nazis are marching down your avenue, what are things that how will you be ready to respond to that when that event happens? And so a lot of times, we kind of live in these silos where we hope these things don't happen. Now, you take, for example, school shootings.
Yeah.
Gosh, you hope. My goodness, what happens if it does?
Yeah.
Are you ready? What's the plan? Right?
Okay. Sure.
Yeah. So readiness. And so the next is responsiveness. As we get ready, as we work with key stakeholders, as we develop policies and procedures and budgetary decisions, it puts us in a better position to respond, because now we're saying, okay, we've done the work with education, we've done the work with adjusting policies, procedures, and putting things in place. Now, when these events occur, we have something to say, we have something to share. We must not remain silent. This is where, not that we toot our own horn about all the things that we've done, I think we speak from a fundamental and deep conviction of the experience of us doing the work. And out of this conviction, we defend and amplify the pain that others are experiencing. Out of this conviction, we call out the systemic evil and sin of white supremacy. Out of this conviction, we are able to communicate and imagine a world of equity, inclusion, diversity, belonging. These are not Marxist communist principles. These are principles that are enshrined in our most sacred founding documents, right? E pluribus unum, out of many, one, right? And so this is etched within the fabric of our civil religion. So we communicate that with conviction because we have learned and we have done the work, and we are able to speak out with a prophetic clarity, a moral clarity, an ethical decisiveness on the evil and moral injury of what is happening. And finally, renew.
I just want to catch up with you. So you talked about the importance of stakeholders. You're seeing that as more than just the church. What are some of the other stakeholders?
Exactly. I see that as law. I see other key stakeholders in our community as law enforcement. I see that as city government, city leadership. I see that as not with connection and collaborative elements with nonprofits. For example, the church that I led in Durham, North Carolina, the 6-8 United Methodist Church, hosted dialogue discussions with law enforcement from Durham Police Department. The assistant chief of police would come in consistently, regularly, and host community forums to talk about issues, to talk about body cams, to talk about constructions of new detention centers, to build those bridges. That's very, very important. So I think the church can take the lead in that and be a bridge to communities and to civic organizations.
Awesome. And then I interrupted you when you were getting ready to go to the fourth one.
Oh, yeah, the
renewal.
fourth one. Renewal. That's right. Yeah, right. And so I think, that's where we harness disruptive power, this disruption for transformational change, right? Sometimes it's hard to break the status quo because it's so entrenched. It's just so deep in the dirt with how we have done things. But sometimes storms, crises can be a blessing that allows us to uproot some entrenched ideological thinking and imagine something very new. So, right? And so what does it look like to create? You look at earthquakes, you look at other storms. What does it look like for us to harness their disruptive power to have more transformational change in a community? Transformational change that includes resiliency to these crises that are current causing the disruption. A lot of times with disruption, we want it to just go away. Let's go. Let's not talk about it. I have heard from pastors that I've served under, that I have been in connection with. Hey, don't say anything. A lot of people are angry. Let's let it pass. As opposed to harnessing the disruption to do some digging and uprooting of entrenched attitudes that are problematic towards the ideals of justice, peace, and equity, and all that stuff. We just wanted to, let's just don't. I'm telling you, I have been a staff member. I was in full-time ministry for 13 years. And I was, young. 8 of those years were in predominantly large evangelical churches, mega church model. And I can't tell you how many times we were advised, do not post anything on social media. Don't talk about it. Let it pass by. We're not going to say anything. We're not going to. Now, listen, a lot of times they say, don't say anything because, they don't want to offend anyone. But the problem is they haven't done, these leaders, faith leaders, pastors haven't done the work. They haven't connected with key stakeholders that would inform what they say, that would help them to better articulate a message, whether it be a sermon, a social media post, a church news blast, email blast, whatever, right? They haven't done that work, so they're not informed. And they've probably gotten bit before or hand slapped before. And now there's this adverse reaction to speaking out against this. Again, what does it look like to harness this disruptive power to get the type of needed change that breaks the status quo and helps us to have and live into the beautiful tapestry of God's kingdom, right? And so, yeah.
Wow. You talked about that pastors being informed is a key part of that.
Yeah.
Are there other leadership qualities that are beneficial with this model and work?
Yes, I do. I believe the art of listening is so important. Right? And I think a lot of pastors, a lot of times they look to us folks look to us for the answers. And so we're oftentimes out front and we're talking. I do believe that there's a sacred art to listening, truly listening. And I think for a variety of reasons, it can be your education, it could be the size of your church or the size of your church endowment or budget, but sometimes hubris and pride gets in the way of us listening.
Yeah.
What does it look like for us to recognize that we don't know all the answers and to posture ourselves, our hearts and minds in humility to learn, especially from those who we would deem are the others, that are othered in society? And that's very critical.
Yeah, I was telling about the time I was called to downtown because of the protests, and at one point, one of the TV crews came up and asked to interview me, and they asked me what I wanted to say, and sometimes the Spirit guides what you say, and I said, you know what? I said, they don't need to hear me speaking right now. I need to be the one that's listening. And I remember afterwards, because I overthink a lot after I do and say things. Afterwards, I thought, boy, that was a weak response. And I think sometimes we're afraid that listening is a sign of weakness, but it's not.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. No, it's not.
So I think it was last fall, I was reading the book, The Age of Outrage by Karthik Ramana. And he talks about how leaders in business community can lead in what he calls a polarized world. And there was a section in early in the book that read this, that just as governments have systems for managing regular adverse weather events, blizzards, hurricanes, tornadoes in the United States, so organizations and their leaders need an equivalent for managing the stakeholders' hostilities that now contextualize nearly all their decisions. And I remember taking a picture of that page and texting it to you. I thought, he just used your idea, Dorrell.
Oh my gosh.
It's taking the model of how we respond to natural disasters and applying it to other situations. But
Yeah.
it did lead me to think then, do you see that there are other areas where churches could use this model to address some of the situations they're encountering?
Yeah, Ramanan's call. It's interesting. It's an interesting call for like hostility management, right? And
Hmm.
how can churches leverage their
Mm.
moral capital to mediate? There we go. Mediate
Mm.
polarization.
Yeah.
How can we leverage our moral capital to mediate polarization?
Mm.
And again, I go back to the framework of readiness, the training, the training and the dialogue that we can foster, that we can hold and host to mediate polarization. That's another
Mm.
thing. Now and that's the work I'm doing at Rollins College. Now I wasn't I was doing that work with law enforcement and communities of color, but not quite interfaith, religious,
Mm.
geopolitical conflict. That's what I'm doing now. And so that's the work right now. How do we foster empathy for human dignity amidst deep geopolitical fault lines that are occurring? And I think
Mhm.
what is important is training and empowering and equipping people to be able to have dialogue, to be able to operate in brave space, to have hard conversations where we still are able to hold on to the dignity and worth of the
Mm.
individual. That is so critical amid the polarization.
Sure.
And it clearly is a lost art. We are so entrenched in silos and echo chambers. And so we are going to have to prophetically imagine a world where we
Mm.
can where we can reclaim the power of dialogue and coming together for the greater good, for the common good. And so interfaith work is very
Mm.
critical to what we're doing here at Rollins College, and I hope it can continue. I think that a lot of folks are doing great work. Ibu Patel's group, Interfaith America, have been doing for decades
Mm.
amazing work when it comes to dialogue
Mm.
and across differences. And so, yeah, I think that's going to be very important.
Yeah, we talked about leadership qualities dealing with racialized crises. Are there specific leadership qualities that could be beneficial when dealing with polarization?
Hmm.
And one of the reasons I asked that question is that I had one of our pastors say to me that, she said, we've been trained to be social justice warriors. We haven't been trained to lead a congregation where half the people think one way and half think the other.
That's so
Yeah.
true. That's so
Yeah.
true. Yeah. Gosh, I think that's so important. I think that there are some key components that we have to take into account. I think when it comes to this work, I think first is dialogue and education. So I think education is again foundational, right? Like, what does it look like to be educated on the historical and cultural context of these conflicts?
Hmm.
Very, very important. I think, in addition to that, shovel diplomacy is important. What does it look like for disparate groups of people, different people, to come together for the common good and a greater good? Right? Shovel diplomacy is huge. Um, um, and I think that looks like collaborative service projects that we can do together to
Hmm.
get people in the same vicinity and space and working together for the common good. I also think that, um, I think another uh, key component is going to be how we navigate resolution. What type of framework are we using to address misunderstandings or conflicts or conflicts? Um, and so I think we have to be very skilled at identifying and articulating our commonalities. I also think that we have to be adept at that, as Walter Brueggemann communicates, this kind of imaginative work, this framing of a new world,
Hmm.
right? You're right. We a lot of us have been trained as kind of social justice kind of ethic warrior. I think that's important. I think it's vital. I think in addition to calling out injustice, we have to lift up bridge building as well. I think bridge building, I think, is foundational to that is this identification of commonalities and this adept articulation of imagination, what we can become, right? What we can become. And Dr. King spoke on this frequently when it came to beloved community. This beloved community, a community that creates light together within the environment of vulnerability and honesty through formal and informal interactions and engagement. It's we are recalibrating our approach to engagement, to pedagogy, and creating this ethic of bridge building and a focus on our commonalities while still maintaining our deep convictions and differences.
Sure.
And so, yeah, that's my thoughts on that. Loose thoughts, kind of a bit rambled there, but yeah.
I like the notion of having a vision further down the road than just what's happening now or in the next day or two, but having just a hope and a vision of what it can be and trying to live towards that. Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you to look into your crystal ball now. What are some other potential areas of crisis that you think the church is going to have to be prepared for?
Yeah, I think we need to be. We're going to have to start really thinking through and preparing for a fracturing of our democracy. And what I mean by that is a deep skepticism of key institutions that have upheld our democratic norms and traditions. We are going to have to prepare for a deep suspicion and skepticism. We see it. We've seen it. There is a sizable contingent of our population that believe that the 2020 election was stolen, right? That professors are the enemy, higher education, right? I mean, we're starting to see this fracturing, and for better or worse, kind of this internet, Western-led international order, which I have quite a bit of bones to pick with that. But this idea of free trade, right? No, yeah, right. But this idea of free trade, this idea of alliances, this kind of protecting the flow of goods across the globe, as opposed to this regional hegemonies, hegemonic powers like controlling different areas. We're just seeing distrust in these institutions, and we're going to have to figure out what that looks like in the future. And I think unfortunately, we're seeing it here in America. This kind of and I think we're going to have to adjust to continue to adjust to economic deindustrialized changes to our economic structure through deindustrialization practices, right?
Right.
I don't know if manufacturing is going to come back to what it was in the 1950s.
Sure.
Much as I want, and you understand, I can say that, but here's the thing: that hits differently, and you know it because you lived out there. You guys are out there, Midwest, Rust Belt towns.
Yeah.
We have not done a good job of reinvigorating, revitalizing, renewing industry in these towns, and folks are mad.
Yeah.
They are angry. They are desperate. So we're going to have to really prepare for a vastly changed economic system that we have here in this country. We can change. I mean, we did it in the 40s as we demobilized after World War II. There was some shock and some change, but we did that. We've done it in the past. We have to capture that spirit of American ingenuity. And frankly, we have to invest in ourselves. The reality is if we had the political will, we could eradicate child poverty. If we had the political will, we could eradicate homelessness. If we had the political will, we could eradicate many diseases and healthcare issues. We're going to have to do some deep soul searching as we become more isolated, but also more paranoid. And as we do that, higher defense spending. We're going to have to figure that out as a country that spends nearly $1 trillion on defense when you could eradicate homelessness in this country for $35-40 billion.
Wow.
Just saying. And so we're gonna, those are some of the challenges that I see for the future. Well, and here's the thing: racialized crises, these haven't gone away either.
Sure.
We're gonna have to look at climate. We're gonna have to really look at a changing climate, and some of the disasters, like physical climate, right? Physical. That is, I'm a North Carolina. As much as even though I grew up in Florida, my heart is in North Carolina. It'll always be in North Carolina. And my goodness, what my brothers and sisters dealt with in Western North Carolina and Asheville, they are still recovering. I mean, and just right. And so we're gonna have to really, really tackle some of those challenges.
Wow. Well, it's been a treat to talk with you and to make
Thank you. So good to
you. And,
yes.
Thank you for the work that you've done in shaping this model and helping us explore, learn more about it. I probably mention the name of the book one more time in case someone wants to go out and get it. It's called "There's a Storm Coming: How the American Church Could Lead Through Times of Racial Crisis" by Harold Dorrell Briscoe Jr. So thank you for your time today, Dorrell.
Thank you, my friends. Thank you for having me. God bless y'all.
You too.
This is Bishop Suzanne Darcy Dillahunt, and I want to thank you again for joining us for this podcast episode. Leadership has many different forms, all rooted in a strong relationship between the leader and their community. We give thanks for leaders who share their experiences through their writing and interviews, like Dr. Howard Dorrell Briscoe, because in sharing their experiences, our ability to serve and lead our communities grows. Thank you again, Dr. Briscoe, for sharing your wisdom with us in the Southern Ohio Synod. Make sure to subscribe on your preferred podcasting platform so you can catch our next episode. Until the next time we gather on this podcast, remember that we are stronger and better together, joining Jesus in the restoration of the world.